President Trump on his way back to Washington after a week of diplomacy and deals in Asia. The president ended his tour in South Korea with a high-stakes meeting with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping. Leaving that meeting, Trump said China will buy what he calls tremendous amounts of American soybeans. He said he will reduce fentanyl-linked tariffs on China, while Beijing paused its planned rare earth export controls. NTD's Washington correspondent, Mari Otsu, brings us more from that meeting from Gyeongju, South Korea.
It's going to be very strong in enforcing the fentanyl, everything having to do with fentanyl and regulations internally, including taking very strong measures against those that don't obey.
President Trump is rolling back fentanyl-related tariffs on China as he leaves his first face-to-face meeting in 6 years with CCP leader Xi Jinping.
It was 57, now it's 47. Because I believe they are really taking strong action.
Effective immediately, the 20% U.S. tariff on Chinese imports imposed due to Beijing's failure to curb exports of fentanyl ingredients is now reduced to 10%. And on talking China into buying more U.S. agriculture.
Large amounts, tremendous amounts of the soybeans and other farm products are going to be purchased immediately, starting immediately.
President Trump saying that Xi authorized China to start buying U.S. soybeans just before their meeting.
I appreciate it. That was a very nice gesture.
Meanwhile, President Trump declares the dispute with China over rare earths settled.
But all of the rare earth has been settled, and that's for the world. I guess you could really say this was a worldwide situation, not just a U.S. situation.
China, which has a near monopoly on rare earths, elements that play vital roles in cars, planes, and weapons, ramped up their export restrictions on these critical minerals earlier this month. In response, President Trump signed a flurry of deals with Indo-Pacific countries, including Japan, Malaysia, and Australia, to counter Beijing's market dominance. But after his meeting with Xi,
well, there's no roadblock at all on rare earth. That will hopefully disappear from our vocabulary for a little while.
The president says that this is part of a one-year agreement that will be negotiated every year. And minutes before his meeting with the Chinese regime leader, President Trump announces that he's directed the Department of War to immediately start testing the United States nuclear weapons on a, quote, equal basis with other countries, specifically citing China and Russia.
They seem to all be nuclear testing. We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
President Trump also announces that China will begin to purchase American energy, even teasing what he calls a very large-scale transaction of oil and gas from Alaska. He also says that he has plans to visit China in April, after which Xi Jinping will come to visit the U.S. Reporting from Gyeongju, South Korea, Mari Otsu, NTD News.
China's Commerce Ministry confirmed today the regime will suspend its new export control restrictions on rare earth minerals for 1 year. It also said the U.S. will pause its investigation into China's shipbuilding and maritime industries for 1 year. And during an interview on Fox Business this morning, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the U.S. and China could sign a trade agreement as soon as next week. He also said the U.S. would enact a 1-year suspension of certain entity list restrictions. Those restrictions would make it harder for Chinese firms to use affiliates to buy off-limits technology. Bessent added that China has agreed to purchase millions of metric tons of U.S. soybeans in the coming years. Here's the secretary.
Is the U.S. suspending that new rule that was put in place that would have expanded the entity list? Export restrictions to any entity that is at least 50% owned by one or more entities on the list for 1 year?
Yes, we are going to be suspending that for a year in return for the suspension on the rare earth licensing regime. And Maria, what's important to note here, that it was China versus the world. China threatened to put this licensing regime on the entire world, and President Trump, as the leader of the free world, negotiated this deal for everyone. The Kuala Lumpur agreement was finished in the middle of the night last night, so I expect that we will exchange signatures possibly as soon as next week. And Maria, one of the big parts of this agreement, and I'm going to break the news here on your story, is the massive amount of agriculture purchases that the Chinese are going to be doing in this agreement. So the Chinese have agreed to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans during this season, right now, between now and the should be January, and then for the next 3 years, they're going to be buying a minimum of 25 million metric tons per annum for the next 3 years.
Besson also said China has approved the transfer agreement for TikTok, adding that he expects it to move forward in the coming weeks and months. He did not offer more details. China's Commerce Ministry said it would properly handle TikTok-related issues with the United States. And we have more details regarding Trump's Asia trip. He said Taiwan never came up in talks with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping. As for North Korea, Trump said he was unable to meet with its leader Kim Jong-un due to time constraints, but added he is willing to return to the region for a meeting.
We never were able to talk because I was so busy. And really, this is why we came. I think it would have been maybe disrespectful to the importance of this meeting if we did that. So I'd come back. With respect to Kim Jong-un, I'd come back.
2 Republican lawmakers are urging the Trump administration to back Falun Gong practitioners in their Supreme Court lawsuit against Cisco. The tech company is accused of building China's mass surveillance system that tracks and persecutes the group. If the lawsuit is successful, it would signal that American companies can be held liable, in some cases, for abuse of their technologies overseas. Congressman Chris Smith and John Muhlenar wrote to the Trump administration's top Supreme Court litigator. They cited an investigation last month that showed U.S. tech companies, to a large degree, designed and built China's surveillance state. The lawmakers want the Supreme Court to allow the lawsuit to proceed. Falun Gong practitioners argued that Cisco supplied the technology to China, knowing that it would be used to track, detain, and torture believers. The justices have to decide whether an American company can be held liable for aiding and abetting human rights abuses. Cisco has argued that the case should be dismissed because it involves U.S. foreign relations. The Solicitor General under President Trump is expected to file a brief later this year or early next year. President Trump just concluded a meeting with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. Joining us now to discuss is Casey Fleming, Chairman and CEO of Black Ops Partners Corporation. He's a national security advisor specializing in unrestricted warfare and author of the upcoming book, The Red Tsunami, The Silent Storm Killing Your Freedom. So, Casey, good afternoon. Is there more than meets the eye with this meeting with Trump and Xi Jinping? Xi Jinping says that the U.S. and China should be friends, but you've said numerous times before on this program that China is engaging in an unrestricted war with the U.S. So talk to us about that.
It's all good news. It's very temporary. It's window dressing to really what's going on. The CCP is playing the Trump administration. Their overall strategy, they will never wave from, which is unrestricted war to weaken the United States and other free world countries from within, so they don't ever have to fire a shot and go to full military, even though they're still building up military in case that needs to happen. This is all temporary stuff. Talking about, curbing the fentanyl traffic and the fentanyl product out of China. They'll do that. They'll do that for a very short period of time. It'll look like they've done their job, and then they'll ramp it back up. That is drug warfare, and it's one of the 150 methods of unrestricted warfare. China has moved very seriously onto a war footing. So buying grain, it's all good. It's a temporary fix. But they're also hoarding that grain. They hoard over 50% of the world's grain should this thing go into a full-scale war at some point. But they're moving on a war footing. This is all, in my opinion, it's all a chess game. The overall structure and strategy is to completely take over the free world. So this is a sleight of hand by China. They do it all the time, chapter and verse. They've never honored any agreements, and they talk about signatures on paper, and they're not worth a darn. China says, and the CCP says, that those are your rules. Those are not our rules.
So, Casey, has the United States recognized this this as a form of warfare?
Bits and pieces of our government have realized it. A lot of people in the government and in Wall Street don't want to believe that we're in a full-blown war. This is exactly what World War III looks like. You've got drug warfare, cognitive warfare. You've got all these things going on. Why would we ever allow TikTok? Why would we ever allow a Trojan horse application, military grade application in its design and its production? Why would we ever allow that in the United States? And certainly anything short of banning it should never have been allowed in the US in the first place. But that's a direct correlation to every brain that looks at it. So all this is just window dressing. It's a chess game for winner takes all. And this is a temporary piece of the chess tournament. This tournament is playing for keeps.
So can you speak to us about the intensity of this unrestricted warfare that China has engaged on the United States? In the context of that, has it changed over time?
It actually has changed over time. They've perfected it. They've done a fantastic job, made it much more efficient. Remember that administration, that regime, that dark mafia regime called the Chinese Communist Party, it's a straight line from the top all the way down to the last person in China. And if you don't do what we tell you to do, we will re-educate you, which means punish, torture, kill you, or maybe even put you in the organ harvesting program that they have. So it's become much more serious. And I can make it even more direct for you in a few words. How about 6 words? We must live, you must die. That is straight out of the Chinese Communist Party. I'll say it again. We must live, you must die. And we are listening to China. There's only one China. It's completely controlled by a totalitarian, authoritarian regime. And we are still being played by these guys. And we have been for many, many years. Bits and pieces are waking up to it, but it's something that's very serious here. TikTok should never be negotiated. It should be completely banned. They should be buying grain and so on, but you need to understand that is very temporary in the grand scheme of things. Here's another quote for you. The world will be lost within the next 10 years or less. It'll be won or lost in the next 10 years or less. The world will either go full communism or it will go full capitalism and freedom, but there probably will not be any in between. I say it's 10 years, it's probably less than that.
So you said that the U.S. is recognizing this in bits and pieces. How can the U.S. fully understand the scope of the situation, that China views this as a zero-sum game? What does the U.S. need to do to fully counter the CCP's unrestricted war?
The U.S. needs to install a warfare center focused strictly on unrestricted warfare strategy from the Chinese Communist Party. We need to stop listening to all the different influences. One thing that we have to do as a country is to ban all foreign influence. That's any type of money, goods and services, and that type of thing that can alter our decision-making process and our freedom and democracy inside the United States. Ban all foreign influence. That's through universities, that's through government, that's through PAC election campaigns. It's all of that stuff. It's destroying our country. And when the American people find out just exactly how they're destroying the country, they will demand that foreign influence is completely banned. The Warfare Center is very critical. It's an answer back directly to the unrestricted warfare, and it will uncover really what's going on. The things that are holding our country back are we've been being played by the Chinese Communist Party for 3 decades. Same thing with Wall Street, with the lure and the addiction of profits. And it's at the expense of our national security. So all this, the chickens are coming home to roost. Those of us in the intelligence community see it. We've got to get our act together inside the U.S. and the rest of the free world. China says we're going after a multipolar world. That is not the case. They're going after a bipolar world. communism versus freedom, period. So the sooner we realize that and our allies realize that, we need to go into an absolute sharing agreement with manufacturing goods and services and do what China's done to us with rare earth and pharmaceuticals and loads of other industries. The other thing, why to the American people, why would we ever allow rare earths to be monopolized by our number one mortal enemy? And that's them. That's not we don't have them as our enemy. We have to realize that we are their mortal enemy.
So I want to ask you this because you said you see maybe China becoming the dominant country of the world in 10 years or so. It comes as a shock to me because we're hearing reports of China's current economic state, and it is not doing very well. So the question I have is, how can it sustain this war? Because it takes resources. Can you speak to us about how sustainable China is in this unrestricted warfare?
Well, first, China is the grand puppeteer, the puppet master over Russia, Iran, Pakistan, North Korea, and underneath Iran are the terrorist organizations and as well as the drug cartels. So you've got the CCP plugged in worldwide against us. If the American people understood the scope and the depth of that, they would absolutely be shocked. So how are they going to fund it? Yes, their economy is doing very poorly right now. But guess what? You know what really fixes economies are wars, and especially world wars. So, don't rule the CCP out. Don't rule China out. It's just a numbering system. It's just, they cook the books on everything. They release only what they want to release as far as data. And let me tell you, the CCP will survive over any of the rest of the Chinese population. Even their army is only in place to keep the CCP in power. That's the PLA. So again, they're the second largest economy in the world. Yes, by us reducing trade, which is my recommendation, my strong recommendation, it still has a lot of capability in that economy and with their axis of aggressors. The other thing is pay attention to what's happened over the past year. China has become the extreme bully, extremely bolden in their claims. I mean, to go against the world with rare earth and say we're shutting it off, they just showed you their hand. That is not a trading partner. That is a Class A enemy in World War III. So all this window dressing that's going on right now is just a distraction to really what the bigger picture is, which is we're in World War III.
Well, all right, Casey, you've made it very clear for us. Thank you for speaking to us about this.
Thank you for having me.
Hundreds of arrests made in Indiana recently as part of Operation Midway Blitz. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem shared an update on the efforts during her visit to Indiana today.
Listen, we don't want any of these individuals out on our roads, and we don't want them in our communities, and we especially don't want them behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler when they can't speak our language, they don't understand our laws, they can't follow our roadway signs, and they can't interact with law enforcement or our citizens. It's dangerous, and it's not going to happen under the Trump administration.
Through its partnership with the state, Secretary Noem said more than 220 illegal aliens have been arrested recently. Of those, she said about 50 were semi-truck drivers and about 80 more drove large vehicles like buses and moving vans. Noem said their commercial driver's licenses were issued from over a dozen states. She shared recent examples of illegal aliens causing deadly crashes in Indiana. Noem added that the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has just ended a policy that automatically renewed work permits for illegal aliens without additional vetting. She said ending this automatic renewal will help get some of these commercial driver licenses away from individuals who should not have them.
If you are here driving on our streets illegally and our highways, you are endangering our citizens, and your days are numbered.
The Justice Department has charged 19 individuals accused of running an open-air drug market in New York City's Washington Square Park. The U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York detailed the charges. Prosecutors allege the suspects engaged in the large-scale distribution of fentanyl, heroin, and crack cocaine. According to the indictment, police have responded to over 65,000 drug overdoses in the downtown Manhattan Park over the past 5 years. NYPD officers have previously arrested the defendants on more than 80 occasions. In one 6-month period in 2024, prosecutors say the group's drug sales resulted in 2 fatal overdoses. The defendants face federal charges of conspiracy to distribute narcotics, resulting in death. It's day 30 of the government shutdown, and there is still no end in sight for the political impasse in Congress. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has the latest details from Capitol Hill and the significance of the upcoming November 1st deadline.
On November 1st, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program will run out of funds. Some 42 million Americans rely on the SNAP program for nutrition benefits. Also on November 1st, some 134 Head Start centers, which provide childcare to 65,000 American families, are at risk of closing, forcing families to choose in between work and caring for their children.
It means that tens of millions of American families will struggle to keep food on the table because the SNAP program benefits will run dry. It means that WIC assistance, that's women, infants, and children, the nutrition programs, will be at risk of running dry.
Senate Democrats have rejected over a dozen times a continuing resolution to reopen government. Democrats have also rejected Republican proposals to pay accepted federal workers and active duty military personnel.
They are uninterested in doing anything other than jamming their partisan Republican spending bill down the throats of the American people. And as Democrats, we've made clear we will not support a partisan Republican spending bill.
The whip, the number 2 position among House Democrats, says there will be families that are going to suffer, but it was one of the few times, or the few leverage times that we have. Senator from Delaware, frankly, this is our only moment of leverage, and although a very pleasant tool to use.
Not all congressional Democrats agree with their leadership. There is dissent both in the House and the Senate to Democratic leadership strategy.
We're in this position because of Senator Schumer's ineffective leadership. It doesn't mean he's ineffective every single day, but I think we're in this position because the status quo is not working. The old playbook for Democrats is not delivering.
Democrats' latest ploy is, get this, moral outrage that the president isn't stepping in to save Democrats from the consequences of their actions.
The House-passed continuing resolution would fund government until November 21st. Even if the Senate approves the bill, there would be another shutdown by the end of the month. Congressional Republicans are considering a longer-term continuing resolution, one that could even last an entire year. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul has declared a state of emergency as federal funding for SNAP benefits run out. The state will issue $65 million in assistance to food banks amid the ongoing government shutdown. Hochul made the announcement during a news conference this morning.
Today, I'm officially declaring an emergency. This is a food emergency, and I want to unleash every tool at our disposal to keep New Yorkers from going hungry.
New York State receives nearly $650 million in federal funding for SNAP benefits each month. Oregon and Virginia have also issued emergency declarations to free up funds for emergency food assistance. Yesterday, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek pledged $5 million to food banks and declared a 60-day food security emergency. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin has said the state will draw on surplus funds to pay for up to a month of SNAP benefits. A federal judge in Boston appeared poised to order the government to disperse food stamps amid the ongoing government shutdown. Lawyers for 25 Democratic-led states and the District of Columbia are seeking an order to use $6 billion in contingency funds. District Judge Indira Tawani said she planned to make her decision later today. Nearly 42 million low-income Americans receive benefits from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP. The program costs taxpayers $8 billion a month. Starting on Saturday, funds for the program will run out. The Department of Agriculture said last month that contingency funds were available to fund SNAP benefits during the shutdown. However, last weekend, the department said no benefits would be issued on November 1st due to a lack of funds. The aviation industry is calling on lawmakers to think of everyday Americans being impacted by the government shutdown. Today, Vice President JD Vance and transportation officials urged Congress to reopen the government.
Do not put working people in the middle of a problem they should not be in there. We got to think about the families that are going to be affected. Think about when you have to tell your son or daughter they can't play sports because you're not getting paid. Think about when you can't pay your mortgage. Think about when you can't pay your tuition. Put the politics aside, get to the table, negotiate a deal, pass a clean CR right now, and then figure out the problems moving forward.
We're happy to talk about regulatory policy, but not at the point of a gun. You do not get to take the American people's government hostage and then demand that we give you everything you want in order to pay our air traffic controllers. It's a ridiculous set of demands. Let's reopen the government, and then let's sit down and talk about how to compromise on policy for the American people.
Vice President Vance said aviation leaders shared the stress they're under with him and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy during a roundtable today. Duffy noted that air traffic controllers just missed their first full paycheck. He said as the shutdown continues, he thinks we're going to see more pressure on air traffic controllers, TSA workers, and more, and that's going to have a real impact. Vance was looking ahead, noting that there are already staffing shortages and that it will be difficult to recruit with potential candidates seeing federal workers going without pay for weeks. President Trump has just concluded the first meeting of his second term with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. The president has said he will go to China to meet Xi next year, but analysts are saying that in China, behind closed doors, many signs suggest that Xi is losing some of his grip on power, and his control of the party is waning. Joining us now to discuss is Nathan Su, senior investigative reporter at the Epoch Times. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today. So first off, can you give us...
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Nathan. Could you give us what we know so far about Trump's meeting with Xi? Did the U.S. achieve what it set out to do?
Yeah, I think Trump said on his plane coming back from South Korea to United States, he said he's going to go to China in April. And then later, after he visited Beijing, Xi Jinping is going to come to the United States to make a visit. That's all we know by now.
So on the point of the infighting, we're hearing news about this taking place within the CCP. Can you give us some insight on what the environment is like currently among Chinese officials?
Well, I think Xi Jinping is on his way going to the fundamentalist of communist ideology. So what Xi Jinping is facing his whole generations of communist leaders who grow up, and climb up their power ladder that's through this market economy booming in China. That's the whole environment. So Xi Jinping facing a lot of challenges. That's why Xi Jinping is conducting a lot of a purge to the military generals. He's done quite a bit in the last 2 terms of his leadership to the government leaders outside of the military. So now he's focusing in the military. So we're going to see a lot more purge of the generals coming, but doesn't mean Xi Jinping is losing his power. But it only means Xi Jinping wants China to go to more fundamentalist communist way.
So Nathan, in the recent shakeup of the regime's leadership during its 4th plenum, a number of Xi's close allies were sidelined. Who was driving these changes?
I think it's Xi Jinping himself who is driving this whole direction of a purge of generals. Not Zhang Youxia, okay? So that's, I totally disagree of those people who thinking somebody else is driving the purge of all these generals. Now, you have to look at a lot bigger picture. The bigger picture It's Xi Jinping has to deal with a whole generation of leaders, including military leaders, who climb up their power ladder, in the way of market economy. It's booming in China. So Xi Jinping is facing a lot of challenge of those. Now, think about this. In the entire Chinese military, besides Zhang Youxia himself, Zhang Youxia was promoted to the 3-star general in 2011. Now, besides him, every other general, either 1-star or 3 stars, all have been promoted by Xi Jinping. I mean the generals who are currently still serving in the military. So anybody being taken down, you can say, oh, that's Xi Jinping's own people. But what about the rest of them who has not been taken down? There are two dangerous things that are very, there are two mentalities are very dangerous to the situation that will lead our thoughts that dealing with the threat from Chinese communist regime. Now, make no mistake, Chinese communist regime is the biggest threat in the entire human history to peace and humanity. Nobody else, you cannot pick any other regime that poses more threat than the Chinese communist regime today. So therefore, there are two different type of dangerous mentality we need to avoid. Number one is thinking China is our competitor. No, China is not our competitor. The communist regime is our biggest enemy. And number two, the mentality of thinking tomorrow the communist regime will all collapse by itself. Both of these kind of a mentality will eventually lead to us thinking, oh, the threat will not be there tomorrow. We don't have to worry about that much. If we have that kind of thinking, think about what are the people in South Korea, in Taiwan, and in Philippines. They are in a much more complex situation dealing with their society. What they are going to think? Are they going to, we want them to increase their defense budget, but we are actually leading them thinking, the communist regime will just all collapse by themselves. That's very dangerous.
Okay, I just want to follow up on one of your points saying that China is not a competitor to the U.S. China is an enemy to the U.S. Is it possible for the U.S. to collaborate with China on certain aspects, but not collaborate with China on other aspects? What is your stance on this argument?
We need to deal with them. The fundamental goal is to defend the peace. That's the key. President Trump needs to do whatever he's able to defend the peace, because we are living in the most dangerous time window of the next 5 years. From next year to 2030, that's the most dangerous time. We're facing the highest possibility of going to a war with the communist regime. Now, after 2030, the possibility of war will start declining, and I think if we can sustain the peace until 2035, after that, the possibility of facing a war in Western Pacific will go much lower.
Okay, so going back to Xi Jinping's position in the party, can you help us get into his mind just a little bit? Do you think he feels threatened about his power right now within the Communist Party?
I don't think so. First of all, all the Politburo of the Communist Party, including Zhang Youxia, were hand-selected by him. So nobody really challenging him in the Politburo, which is the highest position. It's the highest, the leadership circle in CCP. So what Xi Jinping's challenge is, it's like he's facing a whole generation of leaders who all, have this market economy growing, booming in China. They're all corrupted. So Xi Jinping's, in Xi Jinping's eyes, all these people doesn't have enough loyalty to the fundamentalist, the communist, the ideology. That's his problem. And that's why Xi Jinping is, you look at Xi Jinping, the difference between Xi Jinping and Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao, he keep all his same generation leaders, every one of them, they will serve until they die. They never retire. But Xi Jinping is different. Xi Jinping, ever since he took over the top post of the CCP, he has been retiring. Every term, at the end of the term, all his colleagues will retire. So the maximum is one or two of them will serve like 1 or 2 terms. The rest of them will all gone. And the only one that's been going with him all 3 terms so far is that Politburo member Huang Huning, a very fundamental communist ideology, keeper. So you can see that's clearly that's the direction he's moving towards to, and you can also see how what kind of challenge you're facing him.
Okay, Nathan, just real quick, I want to ask you one more question here. What do you think about the possibility, if any at all, of new leadership within the CCP other than Xi Jinping?
I don't see any light in that thought.
Short and sweet, Nathan. That should do it for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Human rights groups are urging President Trump to press Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping on transnational repression and jailed family members of U.S. citizens. The CCP has persecuted spiritual practitioners of Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, since 1999. But more recently, it has ramped up efforts to export the persecution around the world. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
Human rights advocates called on President Trump to raise the issue of human rights with Chinese leader Xi ahead of their meeting in South Korea. U.S. citizens and residents are facing increased pressure from the Chinese Communist Party's persecution of Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline guided by the tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Since 1999, the Chinese regime has tried to eradicate the practice inside of China, but now it's aiming to do so here in the United States and around the world.
So now China figures out how can we send drones in on the training area? How can we bring lawsuits against Shenyu? How can we use the West legal system to create difficulties for a group that simply really wants to showcase Chinese beautiful thousands of years of culture?
At the heart of the CCP's transnational repression is targeting Shenyun, an American dance company that aims to expose the persecution and showcase the 5,000-year culture of China before communism.
It, in many respects, goes right at the philosophical base of governing China. Should it be governed by a continuation of Chinese culture or some representation of that? Or should it be governed by these authoritarian dictators that claim a communism that's not Chinese at all? Communism is completely atheistic. Shenyu reminds them of how spiritual Chinese people are, and that's a complete threat to the Chinese Communist Party that demands adherence only to the government.
The Falun Info Center asked the president to bring up the issue of detained Falun Gong practitioners with family in the United States, and that the CCP end its campaign of transnational repression of believers on American soil. In Pennsylvania on Wednesday, there was a Falun Dafa Awareness Day at the state capitol.
It's just so brutal. It's not just arresting people, it's actually harvesting their organs, the Falun Dafa followers. And to think that the CCP has gone so far that they're arresting people and making money off their deaths is just incredible. It needs to stop.
We have to stand up for what's right. And so I believe that for all of us, we have an obligation to use the platforms in front of us to speak out against oppression.
State Senator Mastriano introduced a resolution to call for an end to the CCP's persecution of Falun Dafa and transnational repression on U.S. soil. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A packed arena at the University of Mississippi yesterday as thousands gathered for a Turning Point USA event honoring the late Charlie Kirk. The event featured Vice President JD Vance and Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, who urged students to carry on Charlie's legacy. Take a look.
It was a night of emotion, but deep optimism at Ole Miss on Wednesday, where Turning Point USA hosted one of its largest campus events since the group's founding. Student chapter president Leslie Lackman said the event was months in the making, described it as a moment of pride for the university's conservative students.
It is with mixed emotions that I'm standing here at this moment, yet profoundly proud of the event that is happening.
Then came Erica Kirk, widow of Turning Point's founder Charlie Kirk, who told students that courage and faith were at the heart of her husband's message.
This moment, it can either be your breaking point or your wake-up call, essentially your turning point, if you will. And at this moment, every single one of us has a choice to make, whether we stand for freedom or we're just gonna fall for everything else.
Kirk told students they were living through what she called a battle for the soul of a generation, urging them to speak out about their beliefs and not give in to fear.
You can't change a nation if you're enslaved to fear. And you can't call out corruption if you're still chained to comfort. And you can't stand for truth if you first do not kneel before the Lord.
She said her husband's assassination strengthened her faith and urged students to contemplate on why their rights were so precious.
And Charlie would say this all the time. Your rights don't come from the government, they come from God. And he knew what every founding father knew, and nearly almost every university has forgotten, that you cannot have freedom without virtue, and you cannot have virtue without God.
Vice President JD Vance followed with a speech that mixed personal tribute with political conviction, recalling the phone call he received the day Charlie Kirk was shot.
And I remember thinking, what a terrible tragedy for that family. And the second thing that I thought was, what a terrible tragedy for the United States of America.
Vance praised Kirk as one of the most influential voices of his generation and repeated what he said was Kirk's most important advice to students.
Charlie wanted you, more than anything, to invest in the things that were worth having, to build a life that was worth building. And that started, the most important advice he ever gave you was fall in love, get married, and start a family. And I can't honor Charlie without repeating that most important advice.
Vance also reiterated why the conservative movement is so adamant about defending freedom of speech.
And that's why, my friends, that's why we care so much about free speech, as Charlie lived and died for the basic principle that we ought to be able to talk about our differences, we ought to be able to debate them, and we ought to have faith that the best way to make sure that the best idea wins is to actually just have a discussion.
The night ended with a call to action for students to take leadership in their communities and in the nation Charlie Kirk helped shape.
If you care about this country, love it enough to get involved in the process and how we govern it. That is the only way we are going to save the United States of America, and that is perhaps the greatest contribution that you can make to Charlie Kirk's legacy is getting involved in saving this country. I'm in the fight, and I know every single one of you are with me. God bless you, and thank you for having me.
The Turning Point USA spokesperson said on X that more than half the student body of Ole Miss registered for the event, around 14,000 people. According to chapter president Lackman, the organization's decision to hold an event here shows that the University of Mississippi is at the forefront of Charlie Kirk's movement.